She was just a simple housekeeper, but when she saw those two babies crying every night, she uncovered a dark secret the millionaire father was hiding. What she did next changed everything forever. "I pay $3,000 a month and you can't even get two babies to stop crying," Marcos Silveira yelled at the 12th nanny who was quitting in 3 months. "What kind of professionals are you?" Fernanda, a 40-year-old woman with 20 years of experience, had her hands trembling as she packed her belongings. "Mr. Marcos, I've never seen anything like it. These babies don't stop crying for even 5 minutes. It's like they're possessed." "Possessed?" Marcos laughed bitterly. "They're 8 months old. They're normal babies." "Normal?" Fernanda turned to face him. "Normal babies don't cry for 8 hours straight. Every night, normal babies don't stare at the ceiling as if they see something that isn't there. And normal babies have parents who hold them." The last sentence cut Marcos like a blade. He felt his face flush with anger. "How dare you question how I raise my children? I work 16 hours a day to give them everything they need." "Everything but affection," Fernanda murmured, picking up her suitcase. "What did you say?" "Nothing, sir. I just hope you find someone who can help these children because they are suffering." The door slammed shut, leaving Marcos alone in the mansion's entrance hall. From upstairs came the familiar screams of the twins Pedro and Paulo, who at 8 months old seemed to have declared war on silence. It was 2 p.m. on a Thursday, and they had already been crying for 4 uninterrupted hours. Marcos climbed the stairs with heavy steps, stopping at the door to the baby's room. Through the crack, he could see the 2 solid wood cribs shaking with his children's despair. Pedro was red from crying. His fists clenched, his entire body tense. Paulo was doing the same thing, as if they were synchronized in agony. "Carmen!" he shouted, and the housekeeper appeared running. "Yes, sir." "I need another nanny today. Call every agency you know." Carmen lowered her eyes. "Sir, I already tried yesterday after Fernanda said she was leaving. No agency wants to send employees here." "What do you mean they don't want to? They say your nannies always come back traumatized. One agency even said they'll put us on their problematic clients list." Marcos felt his world crumble. In 8 months he had tried everything. Graduate nannies, specialized nurses, even a woman who claimed to be an expert in difficult babies. All of them fled as if the house were on fire. "And now what do I do?" "There's a young woman at the door wanting to speak with you about a job," Carmen said hesitantly. "A nanny." "No, sir, a domestic worker, but she said she has experience with children." Marcos looked at Carmen as if she had gone crazy. "Carmen, the house is already clean. I need someone to make these babies stop crying." "I know, but she insisted a lot. And the way things are—" The screams from upstairs grew louder, as if the babies knew they were being discussed. Marcos ran his hands through his hair, feeling like he was going insane. "All right. Send her in, but I don't promise anything." Helena Silva entered the room as if she feared nothing. 28 years old, blonde hair tied in a ponytail, a simple white blouse and faded jeans. She didn't seem intimidated by the luxurious mansion, nor by the screams echoing through the house. "Good afternoon, Mr. Marcos," she said, extending her hand. "My name is Helena Silva." "Helena, I'll be direct. I don't need a domestic worker. I need someone to make my children stop crying." "I heard them outside. It must be very difficult for everyone." "Difficult?" Marcos almost yelled. "I haven't slept properly in 8 months. I've lost important contracts because I show up to meetings looking like a zombie. 12 nannies have quit." Helena kept her voice calm. "And what did the doctor say?" "That there's nothing wrong with them. Normal exams, perfect health, but they cry as if they're being tortured." "Can I go upstairs and see them?" "What for? You're not a nanny?" "No, but I've taken care of a baby who cried a lot." Marcos looked at her with suspicion. "When I raised my younger brother by myself when I was 18, my parents died and he was 2 months old, and he cried like this. Worse." There was something in Helena's voice that made Marcos stop questioning. "All right, but just to look." They went up together, the sound of crying becoming deafening. The twins' room was a frightening contrast. Very expensive furniture, imported toys, everything perfect. and in the midst of so much luxury, 2 small babies cried as if the world were ending. Helena approached the crib slowly. Pedro's face was wet with tears, his little arms stretched upwards. Paulo writhed as if something was hurting him. How long have they been like this today? Since 10 a.m. and yesterday from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. Helena observed the babies in silence. She didn't try to pick them up, didn't make soft noises, didn't try to distract them with toys, she just watched. "Mr. Marcos," she said after a few minutes, "may I ask a question?" "Go ahead. How often do you hold your children?" The question was like a slap in the face. Marcos felt rage explode in his chest. "Listen here, Helena, whatever your name is. I don't need lessons on how to be a father. I need someone to solve this problem." "I'm not giving a lesson," she said, without changing her tone. "I'm just trying to understand." "Understand what?" "Why they cry." "I already told you the doctors found nothing." "I believe you, but the problem isn't always physical." Marcos stopped yelling. "What do you mean?" "Babies feel everything, sir. They feel anger, sadness, loneliness. Even without understanding, they absorb the emotions of adults. That's crazy talk." "Maybe, but my brother stopped crying when I learned to be calm around him." The twins continued crying as if nothing in the world could console them. Marcos looked at his children, and for the first time in months truly saw them. 2 small, helpless babies who perhaps were asking for something he didn't know how to give. "What do you want in exchange for trying to help work as a domestic worker? $2,000 a month." For $2,000, that was less than he spent on a single night out at a restaurant. Why so little? "Because I'm not a professional nanny. I'm just someone who understands sad babies." Marcos looked at Helena, then at his children. He had nothing left to lose. "You can start tomorrow morning, but let me be clear, don't work miracles. Just try to find out why they cry so much." Helena nodded. "I will find out, sir, I promise." When she left, Marcos was left alone with the babies who continued crying. For the first time, he wondered if the problem wasn't with them, but with himself. That night would be the last time he completely ignored his children's cries, because tomorrow Helena would arrive, and with her truths, he wasn't prepared to face. Helena arrived the next morning at 7 sharp as agreed. Carmen greeted her at the back door with a look of pity on her face, as if she were seeing someone walking straight to a cliff. "Girl, are you sure you want to work here?" the housekeeper whispered, looking nervously at the stairs. "There's still time to give up." "Why would I give up?" Helena asked, tying her apron. "Because they've been crying since 5 a.m. Mr. Marcos didn't even come down for coffee. He's locked in his office, the door slammed shut as if it were a sign." The twins' screams echoed throughout the entire house, a desperate sound that made anyone want to run away. Helena listened carefully as if she were deciphering a complex piece of music. "Are they hungry?" she asked. "They already had a bottle at 6. They've also been changed. They had a bath, everything's in order, but they won't stop crying." Helena slowly climbed the stairs, following the sound of the crying. The second-floor hallway was elegant with expensive paintings on the walls and thick carpet that muffled footsteps. But there was something strange she noticed immediately. All the doors were closed except for the baby's room. "Carmen," she called when the housekeeper came up behind her. "Which is Mr. Marcos's room?" "The last one down the hall, after his office." Helena looked in the indicated direction. Between the baby's room and the father's room, there was at least 20 meters of distance. And he always slept there. Always since the boys were born. And before, when his wife was alive, Carmen became uncomfortable. Before they slept in the master bedroom, which is on the other side of the house. But after Mrs. Isabella passed away, he moved to the farthest room. Helena stopped at the door of the twins' room. Pedro and Paulo were in their cribs crying with an intensity that seemed impossible for such small babies. But she didn't enter immediately. Instead, she stood watching the hallway. "Carmen, show me the whole house. I want to see every room." "What for? You'll only be working in the kitchen and service areas." "I want to understand how this family lived before the babies were born." The housekeeper hesitated. but eventually agreed. They went down to the ground floor, and Carmen began the tour. The house was immense. Living room, dining room, library, office, gourmet kitchen, leisure area, all impeccably decorated, but with a cold air as if no one really lived there. "Where did you have meals when Mrs. Isabella was alive?" Helena asked. "In the dining room always. She made sure they were family moments. And now, Mr. Marcos eats in his office when he eats. Sometimes he stays all day just drinking coffee." Helena went to the dining room. The mahogany table for 12 people was immaculate, as if it had never been used. But on top of the sideboard, there were circular marks on the wood, as if someone had removed objects that always stayed there. "What used to be here?" she asked, running her finger over the marks. Carmen lowered her eyes. "Family photos. Mr. Marcos had everything put away after the boys were born." "Put away where?" "In Mrs. Isabella's room. He locked the door and no one can go in." Helena felt a tightening in her chest. He forbade anything of his wife's to be visible. Not only did he forbid it, he collected everything himself. Photos, clothes, perfumes, even the plants she cared for. He said he didn't want painful memories around the house. "And when did this happen?" "Right after he brought the babies home from the hospital, in the first week." Helena went up to the second floor again this time, paying attention to details she had missed before. The hallway walls had lighter rectangular marks, as if paintings had been removed. At the end of the hallway was a door with a different lock from the others. "That's Mrs. Isabella's room?" she asked. "It was the couple's master bedroom. Now it's been closed for 8 months. Helena approached the door and pressed her ear against it. From the other side came a sepulchral silence, as if the room were dead. But what caught her attention most was its position. The room was right next to the baby's room. "Carmen, can I ask you a very personal question?" The housekeeper tensed. "Depends on the question." "How did Mrs. Isabella die?" "During childbirth complications from the C-section, she lost a lot of blood and they couldn't save her." "And Mr. Marcos was present?" "He was in the operating room when she passed away. He came out of there completely devastated." Helena returned to the baby's room where Pedro and Paulo continued crying. This time she entered and approached the cribs. The babies were clearly exhausted, but they couldn't stop crying. "You feel it, don't you?" she whispered, looking at them. "You know someone very important should be here, but isn't." As if understanding her words, the babies cried even louder. Helena noticed something that none of the previous nannies had perceived. They weren't crying, looking in just any direction. They always looked at the wall that divided their room from the master bedroom. "Carmen," she called, "come here a minute." The housekeeper reluctantly entered the room. "What is it?" "Notice where they're looking when they cry." Carmen observed for a few seconds. Pedro had his little face turned towards the right wall. Paulo was doing the same thing. It was as if they were calling someone who was on the other side. "My God," Carmen murmured. "They're looking at their mother's room." "Exactly. And I bet they've been doing that since they were born. But that's impossible. Babies don't know where people are." "They don't know where they are," Helena corrected, "but they know where they should be." At that moment the bedroom door burst open. Marcos entered like a hurricane, his hair disheveled and a furious expression on his face. "What are you doing here? Why aren't you taking care of what you were hired to do?" "Mr. Marcos," Helena said calmly, "I'm trying to understand why your children cry so much." "I told you yesterday there's no explanation. They just cry." "There is an explanation, yes. And you know what it is, Marcos." Marcos stopped yelling. "What did you say? Your children are calling for their mother, and they know you blame them for her death." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the babies stopped crying for a few seconds, as if they sensed the tension in the air. Marcos turned pale, his hands trembling with rage. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Yes, I do. You removed all memories of your wife, moved to the farthest room possible from your children, and avoid touching them because they remind you of your loss." "Shut up!" Marcos exploded. "You have no right to talk about my family." "Aren't your children your family?" Helena asked without changing her tone. The question hit Marcos like a shot. He looked at the babies who had resumed crying, then at Helena, who stared at him without fear. "They killed my wife," he said, his voice broken. "Isabella was perfectly fine until she decided to have children. If she hadn't gotten pregnant, she would still be alive." Carmen put her hand to her mouth, shocked. In 8 months, she had never heard Marcos speak so openly about the guilt he carried. "Mr. Marcos," Helena said softly, "may I tell you something about myself? I don't want to hear it. When my brother was born, my mother had complications during childbirth. She died 3 days later." Marcos stopped pacing and looked at her. "I was 18 and spent those 3 days hating that baby. I thought he had killed my mother. When she truly passed, I blamed my brother for everything. So what? So I spent 2 months mistreating an innocent child until my father died in an accident. Then I realized that my brother hadn't killed anyone. He was just the result of my parents' love." Marcos sat down in the room's armchair as if he could no longer stand. "But Isabella died because of them." "Isabella died to give them life," Helena corrected. "And I bet if she could choose again, she would make the same choice." "You didn't know her." "No, but I know mothers, and mothers don't blame their children for their own deaths. They ask fathers to love their children for them." The babies continued crying, but now it seemed a different cry. It wasn't pure despair. It was a plea, a call for someone they desperately needed. "The father, Mr. Marcos," Helena said. "When was the last time you held your children?" I don't remember." "You don't remember, or you've never held them?" Marcos closed his eyes. "I never could. Whenever I look at them, I see Isabella dying on the operating table, and they feel that, which is why they cry so much. They know they should be loved, but they only find rejection." Carmen, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. "Mr. Marcos, Mrs. Isabella always said she wanted her children to grow up surrounded by love. She said that," Marcos asked, his voice choked. "She did. In the last months of her pregnancy, she only talked about how wonderful it would be to raise the boys with great affection." Helena approached Marcos slowly. "Do you want to try just for a few minutes?" "Try what?" "To hold one of your children." Marcos looked at the cribs as if they were bombs about to explode. "I can't." "Yes, you can, and they need it." Helena went to Pedro's crib and carefully picked him up. The baby continued crying but calmed down a little at the human touch. She walked over to Marcos and held the child out to him. "Just for a minute," she insisted. With trembling hands, Marcos took his son into his arms. Pedro was smaller than he imagined, more fragile, more real. And the moment he felt his father's warmth, he stopped crying completely. The silence in the room was magical. For the first time in 8 months, one of the twins stopped crying in his father's arms. Paulo, seeing his brother calm, also lessened his crying. "My God," Marcos whispered, looking at his son. He stopped. "Because that's what he wanted all along," Helena said. "His father's love." Marcos looked at Pedro, who was now observing him with curious little eyes, as if meeting his father for the first time. "And maybe he was. I'm a terrible father," he murmured. "No, you're not. You're just a father afraid to love and lose again." "What if I can't? What if I only bring them more pain?" Helena smiled for the first time since she had arrived. "Then I'll teach you. After all, that's what I'm here for." Outside it began to rain, as if the sky was washing away years of accumulated pain, and for the first time in 8 months, the Silvera house knew a few minutes of peace. But Helena knew that this was just the beginning. The most painful truths were yet to come. The magical moment lasted only 5 minutes. Pedro had stopped crying in his father's arms. Paulo watched curiously from his crib, and for the first time in 8 months, the house knew silence. But when Marcos tried to give the baby back to Helena, his hands began to tremble violently. "I can't," he said quickly, holding Pedro out. "I can't look at him without seeing Isabella dying." Helena took the baby, who immediately started crying again, as if he knew he had lost his chance for connection with his father. "Mr. Marcos, what exactly happened on the day they were born?" "I already told you. Isabella died in childbirth." "No," I want to know what really happened. The details." Marco stood up abruptly from the armchair. "Why do you want to know that it won't change anything?" "Yes, it will, because as long as you don't face the truth, your children will keep crying. They feel your pain, Mr. Marcos. They feel your guilt." Carmen, who had been silently observing the scene, took a step forward. "Sir, maybe it's time to talk about that day." "Carmen, no. It's been 8 months that you've carried this weight alone. It's not working." Marcos walked to the window, turning his back on everyone. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the sky remained gray. "You don't understand. I killed my wife." "How?" Helena asked softly. "I convinced her to have children." Isabella had always been afraid of pregnancy. She said she had bad premonitions, but I insisted. I said she was being silly, that women had children every day without a problem. The babies cried softer now, as if listening to their father's confession. "Continue," Helena encouraged. During the pregnancy, she had several complications. High blood pressure, bleeding. The doctor suggested absolute rest, but I was focused on business. I thought she was exaggerating. Carmen lowered her eyes. She remembered everything perfectly. On the day of the delivery, Isabella was terrified. She held my hand and said she was sure something would go wrong. I laughed. I said she was being dramatic. Marcos turned to look at his children, his eyes full of tears. The last words she heard from me were, "Stop being dramatic, Isabella. Everything will be fine." The silence in the room was heavy. Helena continued to rock Pedro, who had calmed down a bit. And then she went into surgery. I stayed in the waiting room nervous, but still thinking her worries were silly. When the doctors came out with the babies, I thought it was over, but they came rushing back. Marcos's voice began to crack. Hemorrhage. They couldn't stop the bleeding. An hour passed, 2 hours doctors coming in and out of the operating room, and I was there praying to God for more time. What happened next? Then a doctor came to tell me they had managed to stop the bleeding, but Isabella had gone into a coma. He said the next few hours would be decisive. Helena approached him. And the babies? The babies were in the neonatal ICU, perfect, healthy, crying loudly, and I hated them. Marco swallowed hard. I looked at them and thought, because of you, my wife might die. Mr. Marcos, let me finish. He exploded. Isabella was in a coma for 3 days, 3 days that I spent in the hospital without eating, without sleeping, just praying. And you know what I was doing, negotiating with God. How so? I said, God, if you save my wife, I'll do anything. I'll give all my possessions to charity. I'll dedicate my life to the poor. Anything, just don't take her from me. Carmen was silently crying. She had never heard this version of the story. On the 3rd day, Isabella woke up. For a few hours, I thought God had answered my prayers. She was weak but conscious. She spoke to me, asked about the babies. And what did you say? I said they were fine. I promised we would raise them together, that she would make a full recovery. Lies. Lies I wanted to be true. Helena realized they were reaching the most painful part of the story. That night, Isabella got worse again. Generalized infection. Her body no longer had the strength to fight. When the doctors called me for the last time, I knew. Marcos sat down in the armchair again as if he could no longer stand. She asked me to promise one thing before she left. What? That I would love our children for both of us, that I wouldn't blame them for her death. Helena felt a lump in her throat. And what did you answer? I promised. I held her hand and promised I would be the best father in the world. And then she smiled, closed her eyes, and Marcos couldn't finish the sentence. He broke down crying for the first time in 8 months. Deep sobs that came from the depths of his soul. Helena put Pedro back in his crib and approached Marcos. Sir, it wasn't your fault. Yes, it was. If I hadn't insisted on having children, she would be alive. Or not. No one knows the future. Isabella chose to have children too, Mr. Marcos. It was her decision. But I convinced her. Convincing isn't forcing. She could have said no. Carmen also approached. Mr. Marcos, may I tell you something I've never told you? He looked at her through his tears. Mrs. Isabella came to talk to me 2 weeks before the boys were born. She said she was afraid of dying in childbirth, but that she didn't regret being pregnant. She said that she did. She said that if something happened to her, I should remind you that the choice had been hers too, that she really wanted to be a mother. Marcos fell silent, processing the information. There's more, Carmen continued. She asked me to hide some things for the boys. Letters, photos, memories. She said that when they grew up, I should give everything to them. What letters? Letters she wrote for Pedro and Paulo. One for each year of their lives until they were 18. 36 letters in total. Helena felt the hairs on her arms stand up. Where are these letters? Hidden in her room. Mrs. Isabella gave me an extra key and made me promise I would only open the room when you were ready. Marcos looked at Carmen with disbelief. You had access to the room all this time. I did, but I respected your pain. I knew it wasn't time. And now it is, Helena interjected. Now your children need to know their mother, and you need to truly say goodbye. Marcos looked at the babies, who had calmed down a bit during the conversation. It was as if they knew something important was happening. I don't know if I can go into that room, he admitted. You don't need to go in alone, Helena said. We'll go with you. What if it's too painful? It will be, but the pain you're feeling now by running from memories is worse. Carmen took a bunch of keys from a drawer. Sir, this room has been closed for 8 months. Perhaps it's time to let the air in. Marcos stood up slowly, like a man walking to his own judgment. All right, but if I can't stay in there, we leave. Agreed, Helena said. They left the baby's room, leaving the door open so they could hear if they started crying again. They walked down the hallway to the master bedroom door, which had been closed for so many months. Carmen put the key in the lock, but before turning it, she looked at Marcos. Sir, are you sure? He took a deep breath. I am. The door opened with a creak. The room was dark with the curtains closed and a smell of a closed-off space. Carmen turned on the light and everyone stood at the entrance. The room was exactly as Isabella had left it. The bed made perfumes on the dressing table, clothes in the slightly open closet. It was as if she had just left for the hospital and would return at any moment. Marcos took a step forward and stopped. I can smell her perfume. Mrs. Isabella always wore that rose perfume, Carmen said softly. Helena observed the room carefully. There were photos everywhere. Marcos and Isabella traveling, celebrating birthdays, their wedding day, and on the nightstand, a photo of her pregnant, smiling and holding her belly. She looked happy pregnant, Helena observed. She was, Marcos admitted, even with fear she was radiant. She said she felt the babies moving and talked to them every night. Carmen went to the wardrobe and opened a drawer at the bottom. The letters are here. She took out a decorated wooden box full of numbered envelopes. On the first envelope was written, "For Pedro and Paulo, first year of life." Marcos took the envelope with trembling hands. Can I open it? You can. She left instructions for them to be opened when necessary. He carefully opened it and pulled out a handwritten letter in Isabella's delicate script. Read it aloud, Helena asked. Marcos began to read, his voice choked. My loves, Pedro and Paulo. If you are hearing this letter, it means that I couldn't stay to take care of you personally, but know that every second of the pregnancy was the happiest time of my life. He paused, tears making it difficult to continue. Continue, Helena encouraged. Your father may be sad and angry now. Perhaps he even blames you for my departure, but don't blame him. He loved me so much that he must be lost without me. Be patient with your daddy. I want you to know that I chose you. Even knowing the risks, I chose to give you life, and I would make the same choice 1,000,000 times over. You are the greatest gift I could give to the world. Helena felt tears streaming down her own face. Take care of each other. Be friends forever, and take care of Daddy too. He will need your love very much. One day when you grow up, tell him that I don't blame anyone for my death. It was the price I paid for your lives, and it was a fair price. Marcos could no longer speak. Carmen finished reading. Live happily, my loves. Be kind, be brave, be loved, and know that wherever I am, I will always be watching over you. With all my love, Mommy Isabella." The silence in the room was absolute. 3 adults cried, processing words written by a woman who knew she was going to die, but who chose to leave love instead of bitterness. "She doesn't blame me," Marcos whispered. "She never did," Carmen confirmed. "She told me that the only thing that made her sad was the thought that you might blame yourself forever." Helena approached Marcos. "Your children didn't kill your wife, Mr. Marcos. They are the last gift she gave you." Marcos looked around the room, seeing for the first time not a mausoleum of pain, but a place full of love and happy memories. "I want to try," he said finally. "Try what?" "To be the father Isabella hoped I would be." Helena smiled through her tears. "Then let's start now." They left the room, leaving the door open for the first time in 8 months. When they reached the baby's room, they found Pedro and Paulo sleeping peacefully. For the first time in 8 months, they weren't crying. 3 a.m. For the first time in 8 months, Marcos was not woken by the twins' cries. The silence in the house was so profound that he woke up on his own, confused, thinking something terrible had happened. He got up quickly and ran to the baby's room, his heart pounding. Pedro and Paulo slept peacefully in their cribs, breathing softly with serene expressions he had never seen on his children's faces. For the first time, they seemed like normal babies, not children tormented by something they couldn't express. Helena was sitting in an armchair next to the cribs, also sleeping. She had spent the entire night there, watching to make sure the babies were truly at peace. Marcos stood at the door, observing the scene he never imagined possible. "Mr. Marcos," Helena whispered, waking up at the sound of him at the door. "Are they okay?" he asked softly, afraid to break the spell. "They are. They slept all night without a single whimper." Marcos approached the crib slowly, as if seeing his children for the first time. Pedro had a calm expression on his face, a small fist clenched near his mouth. Paulo slept on his stomach, his rosy face resting on the pillow. "They seem different," he murmured. "It's not them who are different, Mr. Marcos. It's you." "What do you mean?" Helena got up from the armchair, careful not to make a sound. "Yesterday, when you read Isabella's letter, something changed inside you, and they felt it. Babies don't feel those things. Yes, they do, especially when it comes to their own parents. They lived for 8 months feeling your guilt, your anger, your rejection. Yesterday, they felt love for the first time." Marcos was silent, observing his children. It was true that something had changed in him after reading Isabella's letter. The overwhelming guilt he had carried for 8 months had diminished, replaced by a painful but necessary understanding. "Helena," he said softly, "may I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why do you care so much? You don't even know me or my family. Why are you doing this?" Helena smiled sadly. "Because I know what it's like to grow up without a father's love. Your father didn't love you. My father loved me, but he was lost in his own pain. After my mother died, he spent 2 years blaming me for what happened. 2 years when I felt I didn't deserve to exist." Marcos felt a tightening in his chest. "And what happened?" "He died in an accident before he could forgive me, before he could truly love me again." "I'm so sorry. I don't want your children to go through what I went through. I don't want them to grow up thinking they're guilty of their mother's death." Pedro stirred in his crib, making a soft noise, but continued sleeping. Marcos had a strange impulse to approach and touch his son's face, but still hesitated. "You can touch him," Helena encouraged. "He won't wake up." With extreme care, Marcos reached out and touched Pedro's cheek. The skin was soft and warm, completely real. For 8 months he had looked at his children as if they were ghosts of his dead wife, but now he saw that they were just babies who needed their father. "He's so small," he murmured, and helpless. "He needs you very much." "I don't know how to be a father, Helena. I never learned." "No one is born knowing. You learn by doing." Marcos slowly withdrew his hand and stepped away from the crib. "What if I do everything wrong? What if I accidentally hurt them?" then we fix it. But doing it wrong while trying is better than doing nothing at all. At that moment, Paulo woke up, not crying, just opening his eyes and looking around. When he saw Marcos, he didn't start screaming as he always did. He just watched, curious. "He's looking at me," Marcos said, surprised. "He is. He wants to meet his father." "And now what do I do?" "Talk to him. Babies like to hear their parents' voices." Marcos approached Paulo's crib, nervous. "Hi, son." The word son sounded strange coming from his mouth, as if it were a language he didn't master. But Paulo smiled a small but unmistakable smile. "He smiled," Marcos exclaimed softly. He smiled because he recognized his father's voice. Pedro also woke up at the sound of the voices, but like his brother, he didn't cry. He just observed the scene with childlike interest. "They really are beautiful," Marcos admitted, looking at his two awake and calm children. "They're just like Isabella when she smiles," Helena said. "It's true. They have her eyes, the shape of her face, and your personality, probably." Marcos chuckled softly. "I hope not. I'm very stubborn." "Stubborn can be good. It means you don't give up easily." Paulo began to make soft noises, not crying, but as if trying to converse. Marcos looked at Helena, not knowing what to do. "He wants attention," she explained. "He wants his father to talk to him. Talk about what he doesn't understand anything. It doesn't matter. Babies like the sound of a voice affection. Tell him something about his mother." Marcos hesitated, but then moved closer to the crib. "Paulo, did you know your mother was the most beautiful woman in the world?" Paulo stopped making noises and paid attention as if he understood every word. "She was very happy when she knew you were coming. She bought clothes, chose names, prepared this room with much love." Pedro also seemed to be listening, both babies fixed on their father. "She used to sing to you when you were still in her belly. Always the same song, a lullaby her grandmother sang." "Do you remember the song?" Helena asked. "I do." Marcos began to sing the lullaby softly, a gentle melody he had heard Isabella sing hundreds of times during her pregnancy. The effect was magical. The two babies relaxed completely, as if the song awakened some deep memory of the time they were safe in their mother's womb. "They know that song," Helena said, moved. "Isabella sang it every day. She said she wanted them to be born already knowing they were loved, and they do. That's why they stopped crying when you finally started showing them love." Marcos continued singing for a few minutes until the babies fell asleep again. Then he stood there watching them, feeling something new growing in his chest. It was no longer pain or guilt. It was protection, care, responsibility. "Helena," he said, "can I tell you a secret?" "Of course." "I always wanted to be a father. Since I was a child, I dreamed of having children, teaching them things, watching them grow. But when Isabella died, it was as if that dream had turned into a nightmare. And now I'm scared. Scared to try and not be the father they deserve." Helena approached him. "Mr. Marcos, can I tell you something I learned while taking care of my brother?" "You can. There's no such thing as a perfect father. There are fathers who try, who care, who are present. Isabella didn't expect you to be perfect. She expected you to try. What if I try and fail? Then try again and again until you get it right." Pedro stirred in his crib and opened his eyes again. This time, when he saw Marcos, he stretched his little arms upwards as if asking to be held. "He wants me to pick him up?" Marcos asked incredulously. "He does. He's asking for his father's affection." With a pounding heart, Marcos took Pedro into his arms. The baby snuggled against his chest, sighing contentedly. It was the first time in 8 months that one of his children felt truly safe in his father's arms. "It's an amazing feeling," Marcos murmured. "It's what Isabella wanted you to feel from day one." Paulo, seeing his brother in his father's arms, also began to stretch out his little arms. Marcos looked at Helena, torn. "Can I hold both of them?" "Of course they're your children." Carefully, Helena helped Marcos settle Paulo in his other arm. There he was, for the first time in his life, holding both his children at once. Pedro and Paulo calmed down completely as if they were finally where they always should have been. "They're so small," Marcos said, moved, "and they depend completely on me." "They do, but you are capable of taking care of them." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I saw the love in your eyes when you read Isabella's letter. That love was always there, Mr. Marcos. It was just hidden beneath the pain." Marcos remained silent, gently rocking his children. It was incredible how complete he felt with them in his arms, as if a part of him that had been broken for 8 months was finally healing. "Elena," he said after a few minutes, "you saved my family. I didn't save them, I just showed what already existed. Even so, I owe you more than I can ever repay." "You don't owe me anything, sir. Seeing these babies happy is payment enough." Marcos looked at her with curiosity. "Why are you so different from the other people who worked here?" "Different how?" "All the nannies came here just for the money. They did the job mechanically without really caring about Pedro and Paulo. You genuinely care." Helena smiled. "Because I've been in their shoes. I know what it's like to be a child and feel unloved." "And your brother, how is he now?" "He grew up well despite everything. He's married, has children. He's a good man, but he carries childhood scars that will never fully heal." "What kind of scars?" "Insecurity, fear of not being good enough, difficulty trusting people's love, things that could have been avoided if my father had overcome his pain more quickly." Marcos looked at his children in his arms. "I don't want Pedro and Paulo to have those scars." "Then they won't, because you will be present, you will show them love, you will be the father they need. With your help whenever I need it." "But you will discover that being a father is more instinctive than it seems." At that moment, Pedro began to whimper softly. It wasn't the desperate cry of the last 8 months, but a normal baby cry. "What does he want?" Marcos asked, slightly panicked. Helena laughed. "He's probably hungry. What time was their last bottle?" "I don't know. Carmen, who takes care of that." "Then we're going to learn. Being a father includes knowing when your children are hungry." They went down to the kitchen, Marcos still carrying both babies. It was 4 a.m. and the house was silent, but for the first time in months, it was a peaceful, not tense silence. Helena prepared the bottles while Marcos stayed in the living room watching his children. Pedro continued whimpering softly, but Paulo remained calm as if enjoying being held by his father. "Here you go," Helena said, returning with the warm bottles. "Can I feed them?" Marcos asked. "Of course I'll teach you." Helena showed him how to position the babies, how to hold the bottles, how to tell if they were satisfied. Marcos followed the instructions carefully, concentrated, as if he were learning the most complex operation in the world. Pedro sucked the bottle eagerly, clearly hungry. Paulo drank more slowly, stopping occasionally to look at his father as if he still couldn't believe he was really there. "They've been bottle feeding since they were born?" Marcos asked. "Yes, since Isabella couldn't breastfeed Carmen and the nannies always gave them bottles." Isabella wanted to breastfeed, she wanted to very much. She talked about it throughout the pregnancy. She said it was the most intimate way to show love for her children. Marcos felt a pang of sadness, but this time it wasn't the paralyzing pain from before. It was a gentle longing mixed with gratitude for the good memories. "She would have been an incredible mother," he said. "She will be through the letters, the memories, the stories you will tell about her." When the babies finished their bottles, Marcos placed them on his shoulder to burp them, following Helena's instructions. It was incredible how movements that seemed so natural to other people were completely new to him. "Am I doing it right?" he asked, insecure. "Perfectly. See how natural it is." Pedro burped loudly, making Marcos laugh. "Just like his father," he joked. "And Paulo is more delicate like his mother," Helena observed. After burping, the babies became sleepy again. Marcos gently rocked them, humming the song Isabella used to sing. In a few minutes, both were sleeping deeply. "I'll put them in their cribs," he said. "Do you want me to help?" "No, I want to try alone." He climbed the stairs carefully, carrying both children. In the room, he placed Pedro first, then Paulo, covering them with light blankets. They continued sleeping with serene expressions. Helena stood at the door, watching. It was the first time she had seen Marcos act like a real father, and the transformation was impressive. "Mr. Marcos," she said softly, "may I make a suggestion?" "Of course. How about sleeping in the room next door tonight to be closer to them?" Marcos looked at the guest room that was between the baby's room and the master bedroom. "Do you think that's a good idea?" "I do. If they wake up, you can take care of them personally. And if you don't know what to do, call me or Carmen, but I bet you'll know instinctively." Marcos nodded. "All right, I'll try." When Helena was leaving the room, he called her. "Helena." "Yes." "Thank you for everything." "You're welcome, Mr. Marcos. Sleep well." Helena went down to the room Carmen had prepared for her on the ground floor. For the first time since she arrived at the house, she felt she had fulfilled her mission. The babies were at peace. Marcos was learning to be a father, and the family was beginning to heal. But she knew there was still a long way to go. The transformation had begun, but it would take a lot of work for it to become permanent. From upstairs there was no sound. For the first time in 8 months, the Silvera house slept in complete silence. A week had passed since that first night of peace. Marcos woke up every day at 6 a.m. no longer by the desperate cries of his children, but by his own will. He had discovered that he liked to watch Pedro and Paulo sleeping, to see the serene expressions he had never noticed before. That Friday morning he found Helena in the kitchen preparing the bottles, as she did every morning since she arrived. "Good morning, Helena," he said, picking Pedro up. The baby had woken up first and was observing him with curiosity. "Good morning, Mr. Marcos. Did you sleep well?" "Better than in the last 8 months," he replied sincerely. "And you too. It's incredible how different the house feels when there's peace." Carmen entered the kitchen at that moment with an astonished expression on her face. "Mr. Marcos, do you know what time it is?" 6:15 a.m. "Exactly. And you're awake by choice, smiling with your son in your arms." Marcos laughed. "It is strange, isn't it? Last week I hated waking up. Now I wake up eager to see Pedro and Paulo." "Mrs. Isabella would be very happy," Carmen said, moved. "She always said you would be a wonderful father once you overcame your fear." She talked about that. She did, during her pregnancy. She said you had so much love stored up that when you let it out, it would be overwhelming. Helena watched the conversation as she finished preparing the second bottle. It was amazing to see how Marcos had changed in just 1 week. The bitter and guilty man had been replaced by someone who genuinely wanted to learn how to be a father. "Helena," Marcos said, "can I ask you a favor?" "Of course. I want to take Pedro and Paulo to see the company office today. Can you come with me?" Helena was surprised. "Are you sure, sir, it's a very different environment for small babies?" "I'm sure. I want my employees to meet my children. For 8 months I acted as if they didn't exist. Now I want to show everyone that I am a father." Carmen smiled proudly. "Mrs. Isabella always wanted you to take the boys to work once in a while. She talked about it. She said she wanted her children to grow up seeing how their father worked so they would be proud of him." Marcos felt that familiar pang of longing, but now it was different. It was no longer paralyzing pain, but a sweet longing mixed with a desire to honor Isabella's memory. "Then let's go," he said to Helena. "What time are the babies usually calmer?" "In the morning right after their bottle. But Mr. Marcos, are you sure it's not too early? They're still very small." "Helena, for 8 months I treated them as if they were a problem. Now I want to treat them as what they are, my children." 2 hours later, they were in the car on their way to the company. Marcos drove nervously, constantly checking the rearview mirror to make sure the babies were fine in the car seats he had bought especially for the occasion. "Are they okay?" he asked for the 5th time in 10 minutes. "They're great," Helena replied patiently. "Pedro is sleeping, and Paulo is looking at the scenery." "Can they get carsick from the car's movement?" "They can, but it's unlikely. They've been used to it since they were little." "How do you know that?" Helena hesitated before answering. "Because Carmen has taken them to the pediatrician several times. They always travel well." Marcos stopped at a red light and turned to look at his children. I should have gone with them to those medical appointments. You should have, but don't blame yourself. The important thing is that you are present now. Helena, can I ask you a personal question? You can. Why have you never had children of your own? You're incredible with babies. Helena was silent for a few seconds. It was a question that touched on wounds still open in her life. I had an engagement that ended badly a few years ago, she said finally. My ex-fiancé didn't want me to take care of my brother. He said I had to choose between him and my family. And you chose your family? I chose them. My brother needed me more than any boyfriend. He didn't understand. He said I would never be a good wife because I already had too many responsibilities. Marcos felt angry at a man he had never met. He was wrong. Any man should feel lucky to have a woman like you. Helena smiled sadly. Thank you. But after that I decided that maybe having my own family wasn't for me. And do you regret it sometimes? But then I see cases like yours, families that I need to help, and I think that maybe that's my purpose. What purpose? To take care of broken families, to help parents and children reconnect. They arrived at the company building and Marcos parked in his reserved spot. It was an elegant 20-story building with the name Silvera Importações in golden letters on the facade. Impressive, Helena said. Isabella always said she wanted to bring the boys here to see where their father worked. Marcos commented, picking Pedro up while Helena picked up Paulo. They entered the building lobby, causing an immediate stir. Employees who had known Marcos for years were stunned to see him carrying a baby accompanied by a young woman with another baby. "Good morning, Mr. Silvera," said the doorman, clearly curious but trying to maintain his composure. "Good morning, Roberto. These are my children, Pedro and Paulo." Roberto's eyes widened. For 8 months he had seen Marcos arrive at work looking unfriendly, irritated, tired. Now he was smiling proud, introducing his children. "They're beautiful, sir. They look a lot like you." "Thank you, Helena. Let's go up in the elevator." Marcos was visibly nervous. "What if the employees think it's strange that I brought the babies?" "They'll think it's lovely. Everyone likes babies." "What if Pedro and Paulo start crying?" "If they start, we'll go down," but they're calm. The elevator stopped on the 15th floor where the executive offices were located. When the doors opened, Sandra, Marcos's secretary for 10 years, almost fell out of her chair. "Mr. Marcos, what a surprise. And these are my children," he said with obvious pride in his voice. "Pedro and Paulo." Sandra approached, her eyes shining. "May I see them up close?" "Of course." Sandra observed the babies carefully. "My God, they're identical, and what beautiful eyes." "They're their mother's eyes," Marcos said softly. "They are indeed. I remember Mrs. Isabella. What a special woman." Other employees began to approach, drawn by the commotion. In a few minutes there was a small crowd around Marcos and Helena, all wanting to meet the babies. "Mr. Marcos," said Carla from accounting. "Excuse my curiosity, but is this the new nanny?" "This is Helena," Marcos responded. "She has helped us a lot in recent weeks." Helena noticed that he hadn't explained exactly what her role was and was grateful for it. It would have been awkward to say she was a domestic worker in front of all those executives. Pedro began to get agitated with so many people around, making soft noises that Marcos had already learned to recognize. "He's getting uncomfortable," he said to Helena. "Let's go to your office. Fewer people, calmer environment." They entered Marcos's office, an elegant room with a view of the city. Helena placed Paulo on the leather sofa while Marcos rocked Pedro. "What an amazing view," she commented. Isabella loved this view. Whenever she came here, she would spend hours looking at the city. She came often. She did, especially in recent years. She said she wanted to understand my work so she could talk to me about business. Marcos approached the window, still rocking Pedro. She would sit there on the sofa where Paulo is now and watch me work. She said it was relaxing to see how I focused. "You were very close." "We were. Perhaps that's why it was so difficult to accept the loss." Helena approached him. "Mr. Marcos, Can I tell you something I learned about grief? You can. The pain of loss never completely goes away, but with time it transforms. It stops being a pain that paralyzes and becomes a longing that propels you forward. How so? You can use the love you felt for Isabella to love Pedro and Paulo. You can raise them the way she would have wanted, teach them the values she had. Marcos looked at his son in his arms. Do you think I can do it? I'm sure. I saw how much you changed in 1 week. If you can do that, you can do anything. Pedro had completely calmed down and was now watching his father attentively. Paulo on the sofa was also quiet, as if he sensed he was in an important place for the family. Helena, Marcos said, I want to show you something. He went to his desk and opened a drawer, pulling out a picture frame that was face down. It was a photo of Isabella, pregnant, smiling, and holding her belly. This photo always used to be on my desk. The day the boys were born, I turned it face down and never could look at it again. And now, Marcos placed the photo upright on the desk in its usual position. Now I want her to see how our children are growing up. Helena felt her eyes fill with tears. Isabella would be very proud of the father you are becoming. Do you think so? I'm sure. At that moment, Sandra knocked on the door. Mr. Marcos, excuse the interruption, but there's a situation that needs your attention. What kind of situation? The Chinese supplier is having documentation problems. It could delay delivery by 2 weeks. Marcos looked at Pedro in his arms, then at Paulo on the sofa. Months ago, this situation would have made him desperate, made him work late to resolve it. Now his priorities were completely different. Sandra, scheduled a video conference for Monday. Today I want to be with my children. Sandra was surprised. The Marcos of 8 months ago would never postpone an urgent problem to spend time with anything other than work. Are you sure, sir, it's a $2 million contract? I'm sure. Money can be recovered. Time lost with children, never. After Sandra left, Helena looked at Marcos with admiration. You really have changed. Isabella always said I worked too much, that I would miss important moments in life because of business. And now you understand what she meant. I do. These 2 boys will grow up so fast, I can't miss a single day with them. Paulo started to whimper on the sofa. Marcos immediately picked him up, leaving Helena holding Pedro. What does he want? He asked, already more confident than a week ago. He probably needs a diaper change, and then it will be time for his bottle. Is there a bathroom here with a changing station? Helena looked around the executive room. Doesn't seem like it. Then we'll improvise. Marcos cleared the meeting table and spread out a towel from the cabinet. Will this work? It will. Perfectly. Helena watched Marcos change Paulo's diaper carefully, still clumsy but determined to learn. It was incredible to see how a man who a week ago wouldn't even touch his children now made a point of personally taking care of their every need. Done, he said proudly when he finished. He's clean and smells good. Very good. Now Pedro. Marcos changed Pedro too, gaining confidence with each movement. When he finished, both babies were calm and alert. They seem to like being here, Helena observed. It's as if they know this place is important to their father. At that moment, the door opened and a 50-year-old man entered without knocking. It was Rodrigo Mendez, a minority partner in the company and one of Marcos's closest associates. Marcos, I need to talk to you about my God. Rodrigo stopped mid-sentence upon seeing Marcos with the 2 babies in his arms. Rodrigo, these are my children, Pedro and Paulo. Rodrigo was dumbfounded. He had known Marcos for 15 years and had never seen him show any interest in his children. Marcos, what's going on? You disappeared from the company for a week, didn't answer calls, and now you show up here with the babies. What happened is that I finally learned to be a father. How so? Marcos looked at Helena, who nodded encouragingly. Rodrigo, do you remember how I was after Isabella died? I do. You were devastated. I blamed Pedro and Paulo for her death. For 8 months I avoided any contact with them. Rodrigo sat heavily in a chair. Marcos, I didn't know. No one knew. I hid it from everyone, but Helena helped me understand that I was wrong." Rodrigo looked at Helena with interest. "And you are Helena Silva. I work for the family. She saved my children, Rodrigo, and she saved me too." "How?" Marcos took a deep breath and briefly recounted everything that had happened in the last week. The baby's constant crying, the discovery that they felt his rejection, Isabella's letters, the gradual transformation. "Incredible," Rodrigo murmured when Marcos finished. "And now I'm going to be the father Isabella wanted me to be. I'm going to reduce my workload, spend more time at home, raise my children with love. And the company will continue to grow, but it will no longer be my only priority." Rodrigo smiled for the first time since he had entered. "Isabella would be proud of you." "I hope so." Pedro began to make hungry noises, and Paulo soon joined him. Helena looked at the clock. "Time for a bottle," she said. "Is there somewhere here to warm up milk?" Marcos asked. "There's a small kitchen on the executive floor," Rodrigo replied. "But Marcos, are you going to feed them here?" "I am." "Why?" "Well, it's an executive office." Marcos looked at his partner with an expression Rodrigo had never seen before. It wasn't irritation or impatience. It was serene determination. "Rodrigo, these are my children. They are welcome wherever I am." Of course. Sorry, it was just a surprise." Helena returned with the warmed bottles, and Marcos settled comfortably in the leather armchair to feed the babies. It was an unusual scene. A millionaire CEO bottle-feeding twins in the middle of an executive office. "Can I help you?" Rodrigo offered, seeing Marcos trying to balance the two babies. "You can hold Pedro while I feed Paulo." Rodrigo carefully picked Pedro up. "How long has it been since I held a baby?" he murmured. "They're special, aren't they?" Marcos said, watching Paulo suck the bottle. "They are, and they seem very calm. They weren't always like this. Helena taught me that babies reflect the emotions of the adults around them. When I was at peace, they became peaceful." "Is that true?" Rodrigo asked Helena. "It is. Babies are much more sensitive than we imagine. They feel tension, anger, sadness, but they also feel love, security, tranquility." "And how did you learn that?" "Personal experience. I raised my younger brother by myself." "Ah, I understand." When the babies finished their bottles, Marcos stood up. "I think it's time to go home. They need their afternoon nap." "Marcos," Rodrigo said, "may I say something?" "Of course." "In 15 years of partnership, I've never seen you so complete. You seem truly happy." Marcos looked at his children, who were sleepy in his and Helena's arms. "You know, Rodrigo, I thought I had lost everything when Isabella died, but in reality, she left me the greatest gift she could give. Your children." "Exactly. And I almost threw that gift away because of my selfish pain." "But you didn't. There was still time to recover." "There was, thanks to Helena." Helena blushed at the compliment. "Mr. Marcos, all the credit is yours. I just showed the way. A way I never would have found alone." They left the company under curious and admiring glances from the employees. In the car, Marcos drove more relaxed than on the way there, softly humming the lullaby Isabella used to sing. "Mr. Marcos," Helena said when they were nearing home, "may I ask you something?" "You always can." "What do you plan to do in the future regarding the baby's work, your life?" Marcos thought for a few seconds before answering. "I want to raise Pedro and Paulo the way Isabella dreamed. I want them to grow up knowing they are loved, that their mother wanted them very much, that their father is present. And work. Work will adapt. I'll hire more people, delegate more responsibilities. I want to be present for their first steps, their first words, their first everything. Isabella, how will you deal with the longing? I will honor her memory by being the husband and father she wanted me to be. I will tell stories about her to Pedro and Paulo, show them photos, read the letters she left." Helena smiled. She would be very proud. "I hope so." When they arrived home, Carmen was waiting at the door with an anxious expression. "How was it?" Did the boys behave well? They behaved perfectly, Marcos replied proudly. They were the most admired babies in Sao Paulo today. And you, sir, how did you feel taking them? I felt complete, Carmen. For the first time in 8 months, I felt like a real father. Carmen smiled with tears in her eyes. Mrs. Isabella is watching everything from above, I'm absolutely sure. I think so too. They entered the house, which no longer seemed like the dark and silent place it had been a week ago. There was life there. There was a future. There was hope. Helena went upstairs with Marcos to put the babies to sleep. In the room, he placed them in their cribs, carefully covering them with light blankets. "Sleep well, my loves," he whispered. "Daddy will always be here for you." Pedro and Paulo closed their eyes almost immediately, as if they knew they were finally safe, loved, protected. "Mr. Marcos," Helena said when they left the room, "may I say I'm proud of you?" "You may." "And Helena?" "Yes. Thank you for giving me back my children and for giving me back myself. It was a pleasure to see this family reconnect. It was the greatest gift I could receive." They went down together to the kitchen, where Carmen was preparing dinner. The house was at peace, full of life and possibilities. The transformation was complete. Marcos had become the father he always had the potential to be. Pedro and Paulo finally had the paternal love they needed, and Helena had fulfilled her mission of healing a broken family. But there was still one last surprise, a discovery that would change everything forever. 6 months after that first night of peace, the Silveira house had completely transformed. The laughter of Pedro and Paulo, who were now 1 year and 2 months old, echoed through the corridors that once knew only silence and tension. Marcos had become the present father Isabella had always dreamed of, and Helena continued to be the guardian angel who kept the family united. It was a Saturday morning when everything changed forever. Helena was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when she heard Marcos talking to the babies in their room. In recent months, he had developed the habit of telling stories about Isabella every morning, showing photos of their mother and reading excerpts from the letters she had left. "Pedro, Paulo, look how beautiful you both are in this picture with Mommy," she heard him say. "She held you in her belly and said you would be the most loved babies in the world." Helena smiled, preparing the morning bottle. In 6 months, she had never tired of hearing Marcos speak affectionately about Isabella. The pain had transformed into sweet longing, and guilt had given way to gratitude. "Helena," Marcos's voice shouted from upstairs with an urgency that startled her. She ran upstairs, fearing something had happened to the babies. She found Marcos in the room, holding Pedro, his eyes full of tears of joy. "What happened?" she asked, concerned. "Helena, you won't believe it," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "What?" Marcos put Pedro down, and the baby stood alone for a few seconds before taking his first wobbly steps towards Helena. "He walked," Marcos shouted. "Pedro took his first steps." Helena knelt down and opened her arms to receive Pedro, who reached her proudly, smiling at his achievement. "My God, how beautiful! Congratulations, Pedro." Paulo, seeing the commotion, also wanted to try. Marcos stood him up, and to everyone's surprise, Paulo also took a few unsteady steps before falling onto the rug, laughing loudly. "Both of them on the same day," Helena exclaimed. "What an incredible coincidence!" "Helena," Marcos said, picking up both children. "It's not a coincidence, it's today." "What do you mean it's today?" "Today marks exactly 1 year since Isabella died, 1 year since our children were born." Helena felt a shiver. It really was February 15th, the date that had marked both pain and life in the Silveira family. "And they chose today to take their first steps," she murmured. "It's as if Isabella is saying that everything is okay, that life goes on, that our children are growing up happy." Carmen appeared at the bedroom door, drawn by the shouts of joy. "What's happening here?" "Carmen, Pedro, and Paulo walked," Marcos announced proudly. "Both of them on the same day, and it's not just any day, Carmen, it's Isabella's death anniversary." Carmen put her hand to her chest, moved. "Mrs. Isabella is watching everything, I'm absolutely sure. Marcos put the babies down again, and they continued trying to walk, each step celebrated as a great victory. Helena observed the scene, her heart full of emotion. "Mr. Marcos," she said, "may I tell you something? You always can." "Today is also a special day for me." "Why?" Helena took a deep breath before answering. "Because today marks exactly 6 months since I arrived here, and in these 6 months I've witnessed the most incredible transformation I've ever seen in my life." "What transformation?" "Yours, Mr. Marcos. 6 months ago you were a broken man, consumed by guilt, unable to love your own children. Today you are the most dedicated father I know." Marcos felt his eyes fill with tears. "Helena, without you I never would have gotten this far." "Yes, you would have. Maybe it would have taken longer. Maybe it would have been harder. But love always finds a way." Pedro stumbled towards Helena and raised his little arms, asking to be held. She picked him up and he rested his head on her shoulder, a gesture he had made every day for months. "Helena," Marcos said softly, "I need to tell you something." "What?" "You're no longer our housekeeper. You stopped being one a long time ago." "What do you mean?" "Your family, Helena. Pedro and Paulo love you as if you were family. Carmen treats you like a daughter. And I see you as the sister Isabella would have chosen to take care of our children." Helena felt tears streaming down her face. "Mr. Marcos, stop calling me Mr. We're family." Carmen approached and hugged Helena. "Girl, from the first day you arrived here, I knew it wasn't a coincidence. It was divine providence." "How can you be so sure?" Marcos smiled. "Because you arrived at the exact moment we needed you. Because you knew exactly what to do. Because you never gave up on us, even when everything seemed impossible." Paulo also approached Helena, wanting to be held. She picked up both babies, one in each arm, feeling a completeness she had never experienced. "Helena," Marcos said, "I want to make you a proposal." "What kind of proposal?" "I want you to officially be Pedro and Paulo's godmother, not just on paper but in life. I want you to help raise them to be present in all phases of their lives." "Marcos, I don't know if I deserve such an honor." "You deserve it more than anyone in the world. You gave us back our lives, Helena. You taught us to be a family again." Carmen nodded vigorously. "Mrs. Isabella would be very happy knowing someone like you is taking care of the boys." Helena looked at Pedro and Paulo in her arms. In the past 6 months, she had grown attached to the babies in a way she never imagined possible. They truly had become the children of her heart she had never had. "I accept," she said finally. "It would be an honor to be their godmother." Marcos hugged her, still holding the babies. "Thank you, Helena, for everything." At that moment, Pedro looked at Marcos and said clearly, "Daddy." Everyone fell into absolute silence. It was the first clear word any of the babies had spoken. "He said, 'Daddy,'" Carmen shouted. "He did," Marcos confirmed, picking Pedro up. "Say it again, son." "Daddy, Daddy," Pedro repeated, proudly smiling. Paulo, not wanting to be left behind, also tried. "Da-daddy." "Both of them spoke on the same day they learned to walk," Helena exclaimed. "What a special day." Marcos looked up as if speaking to Isabella. "Love, our children are growing up, and they're happy. I hope you're proud." Carmen wiped the tears from her eyes. "She is Mr. Marcos. She's watching everything and smiling." Helena observed the family she had helped rebuild. 6 months ago, it was a house full of pain, silence, and guilt. Now it was a home full of love, laughter, and hope. "Marcos," she said, "may I suggest something?" "Of course." "How about we visit Isabella's grave today to tell her about the boy's first steps and first words?" Marcos smiled through his tears. "That's a perfect idea. She'll want to know everything, and we can bring flowers, white roses that were her favorites." Carmen suggested, "Let's all go together." Marcos decided, "As a family." An hour later, they were at the cemetery. Marcos carried Pedro. Helena carried Paulo, and Carmen carried a bouquet of white roses. It was the first time Marcos had visited Isabella's grave since the burial. "Hi, love," he said, kneeling before the tombstone. "I brought our children for you to meet." He placed Pedro on the ground, who immediately began to walk towards the grave. Paulo did the same thing as if he instinctively knew where he was. "They learned to walk today, Isabella, and they said Daddy for the first time. They're growing up beautiful and healthy." Helena approached. "And very loved. Every day I tell them how special their mommy is." "Isabella," Marcos continued, "I want you to meet Helena. She saved us, taught us to be a family again. She's going to be Pedro and Paulo's godmother." The wind rustled the trees around them as if Isabella were giving her approval. "Thank you, love," Marcos whispered, "for giving me these two treasures, for teaching me that love is stronger than pain, for forgiving me." They stayed there for a few minutes in silence, a family rebuilt by love and the determination never to give up. When they returned home, Pedro and Paulo ran, or rather wobbled, to their toys, happy and loved babies. Helena prepared lunch while Marcos worked on his laptop, but this time with his children playing nearby. "Helena," he said, "you saved more than our family. You saved Pedro and Paulo's future." She smiled. "And you saved mine. You gave me the family I always dreamed of having." Outside, the sun shone brightly, illuminating a house that had known the deepest darkness and found the brightest light. The housekeeper no one wanted had become the most important piece of the family, and the babies who cried every night now filled the house with laughter every day. The miracle was complete.